The veterinary industry is at a turning point. Burnout is rising, staffing is tight, and consolidation is changing the landscape. Practice owners are having to rethink not just how they operate, but how they lead. The old model is no longer sustainable. One person cannot carry every decision alone. The practices that thrive today are the ones building strong teams, creating transparency, and developing leadership across the organization. Welcome to the Veterinary Business Institute's podcast, where we explore strategies, systems, and leadership approaches that drive real growth in veterinary practices. I'm your host, Don Adeesha, and it's great to have you here. Today, I'm joined by Elise M. Lacher, owner and consultant at Strategic Veterinary Consulting, Incorporated. Elise combines financial expertise with real-world consulting experience to help veterinary practice owners build more transparent, more collaborative, and more financial healthy businesses. In this episode, we'll talk about why the traditional leadership model is breaking down, how shared leadership works inside strong teams, how to build a team that takes ownership, and how to use financial data as a tool without feeling overwhelmed by it. This podcast is sponsored by Reimagining. Reimagining helps veterinary practices build stronger, more profitable, and more sustainable businesses. Now, with that being said, Elise, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you.
It's good to be here tonight, talking about one of my favorite topics.
So, Elise, a lot of veterinarians step into leadership with the mindset that they need to make every decision and solve every single problem. What needs to change about that today?
What you were talking about earlier is exactly the reason why it needs to change. The last century was the industrial age. And if you remember, Ford started the assembly line with the idea of people standing in an assembly line, doing the same thing day in and day out, putting the right nut in the right bolt in order to get the car built. In the 21st century, we're in the knowledge age right now, and that's very different from what it was before. No businesses today, very few businesses today, and especially not veterinary practices, are the same thing that they were even 10 or 15 years ago. Veterinary profession is changing dramatically. We used to have what was called the doctor-centered practices, where the doctor was on the pedestal and everything revolved around the doctor. That's not the case today. We really need to have client-centered practices, and it takes an entire team in order to make that happen. The doctors cannot achieve the results they want to achieve in their practices if they're the only ones that are making every decisions and solving every problems. And I love it when I walk into practices and I hear the veterinarians say, for example, the receptionist doesn't know what she's doing. I need to tell her how to do it right. And I will tell you, there is no veterinarian I know of that would last even 10 minutes as the receptionist in their practice. And they really don't know what the receptionists are dealing with day in and day out. Same thing with the technicians and the clients. It's got to be using the mindsets of and the talents and the skills and the experience of the entire team in order to make the decisions. And it's interesting when you listen to veterinarians saying they're all burned out. I don't know about you, but I will tell you, if I have to make every decision that needs to be made every day, I'm worn out also. There's no way in hell that I can possibly make every decision and accomplish all of the things that I need to accomplish. It just can't happen. And the fact of the matter is that when you share the decisions that need to be made and using, I'm not going to say groupthink where everybody has an opinion, but that they do input and give their opinion. And much of the problem that we have today with teams feeling burned out is that they're not heard. And they're not always going to take every input or decision that a team makes to the owners, but they're the ones with their that are in the trenches. They're the ones that are seeing what's going on. They've probably got some input to you, Doc, that would be very helpful for you if you're the one that's ultimately going to be making the final decision. We've got to learn how to play well in the sandbox with our entire team. Remember that from kindergarten. It works well in business today also.
It's amazing. Now, delegation seems to be at the core of that conversation. Since it's so difficult to delegate, since veterinarians are by and default really A-type personality, they made it there because they owned up every mistake they did and solved it along the way. How can they get comfortable with the art of delegation?
Well, probably I would not have them start by delegating doing brain surgery in the surgery suite. There are other things that are done, other decisions that are made in the practice that can be delegated to their technicians or their CSRs without starting with the most difficult decisions that need to be made. It's also interesting that in today's society, depending on your team, we do have what's called hovering mothers that have made decisions for their little children all along. So not everybody does know how to make decisions and give input. So part of your job, Doc, is to, first of all, hire right, which we'll get to that probably at some point tonight, but more importantly, to teach our team members how to make decisions. Whether they need red pencils or blue pencils or going, even simple things like where we're going to lunch or just simple decisions, asking for their input and then listening to what they have to say and learning how to communicate with them by helping with not confrontational communication, but by just teaching them and showing them and helping them learning how to make decisions. And yes, to some extent, that's not what you signed up to do, Doc, because you just wanted to take care of the puppies and the kittens. But in all reality, you can't run a practice today without having a support team. You can run it much more profitably and peacefully if you've got a good support team that's helping you with all that you're doing day in and day out.
There we go. And that's the difference between the clinical side of things and the business side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Elise, you talk about shared leadership and transparency. What do those look like in a healthy veterinary practice?
Oh, my goodness. You're familiar with vet conferences, correct? And when you go to conferences, there's this big hall called an exhibit hall. And that exhibit hall is full of salesmen that just love to get their hands around these little unsuspecting veterinarians that actually can be told and sold to much more easily than they like to think. And what I find interesting is when veterinarians go to these exhibit halls and then come home and tell their staff, by the way, I just want you to know that next week we're having a CT scanner delivered to the clinic. That's not what we need to be doing. First of all, transparency is not just sharing with the team your financial statements, which is what a lot of veterinarians think about. Ross Clark, a number of years ago, was a big proponent of open book management. Whether or not you go with open book management or some variation of that, you still want to be transparent with your team a little bit appropriately about how the practice is doing. But in addition to that, you also want to be transparent with your team about things like, we're thinking of that. We lost a technician. We are going to be hiring another technician and getting input from the team. What I find interesting in some practices is where the doctor thinks what needs to be hired to replace someone, what the team, who are actually in the trenches day in and day out, think they should be looking for as a new addition, can be very different. Talking about things like getting new equipment or starting a new service. Starting new services is also very interesting to me, that doctors sometimes think that when we're going to start doing a new service, whether it's acupuncture or lasers or any number of the new things that are joining us every day today in medicine, that somehow or another you just snap your fingers and suddenly that new equipment or nurse service appears. And they don't always think through the training and the equipment and the location where in the practice we're going to be doing this. Many of our practices are using every square inch right now to be doing exams or surgery or whatever. They don't have room even to put that new CT scanner or whatever it is. If you're going to be doing a service, there's training and marketing and lot of things that need to be done in order to make sure that that new service is actually profitable. So sharing with your team, when you're having team meetings, nobody likes a boring, dull team meeting. Patrick Lencioni wrote a book called Death by Meeting, and that's certainly the case, and we don't want to go into that trap. But sharing in these team meetings what it is that's going through your head and what new ideas you might be thinking about can not only make these meetings more interesting, but it makes the team feel that they're really contributing to the overall success of the practice.
Check. Now, you mentioned sharing financials, but sharing only the appropriate amount of financials with your team. What does that look like?
I don't even know a lot of doctors who really get into numbers the way I do when I'm looking at a financial statement. And what I frequently say to doctors is your financial statements are the lab report from your practice. And the numbers are telling you something if you look at the numbers and know how to read them. When I'm talking about sharing with the team, just like the doctors don't want to look at financial statements, I know very few team members that are really interested in spending time each month looking at a set of financial statements. That said, one of the things I do like to share is the financial goal that we have for each day that we need to be achieving in order to be profitable and cover paychecks. Now, I'm not saying that it's all about the money. What I am saying, however, is that clients vote with their feet and their checkbooks. And if you're not connecting with your clients and providing a real service to them, your appointment book is not going to be full and your checkbook is not going to be able to cover your payroll. So looking at the numbers and making sure that now, and again, make sure that you understand, I'm not talking about frivolous recommendations or gouging clients or anything of that sort. I'm talking about standards of care and recommending, educating clients on the whys of that standard of care, and then helping the clients say yes. That kind of talking about the transparency so that your staff knows if you're not achieving the goals that we have, what are we going to do to make this happen? Do we need to do some more training to the staff? Do we need to give them some scripts so that they actually know what to say? Do we need to get them over their feeling that we're only in it for the money?
There we go. That's a great way to think about that. And I think just sharing that little bit of the financial goal for day aligns the team, motivates them financially to care about the business, as well as, it's not overwhelming that they are crippled by it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for the owner who feels the business still depends too much on them, the owner, how can they start building a team that takes more ownership?
Oh, that's interesting. And what I'm going to tell you, and this is something that is very, very near and dear to my heart, and that's hiring correctly. And what I find is that veterinarians and to some extent practice leaders most people have actually had very little training in how to hire. And especially when you're talking about veterinary practices, when veterinarians get involved in the hiring process. They want to know whether or not you can draw blood, whether or not you can put a catheter in correctly, whether or not, and you know the difference between an antibiotic and a vaccine. That kind of information can actually be trained, but what can't be trained is the character, the personality, the attitude, and the thought processes of the employee, the potential employee. While in financial statements, past history is not always an indicative of future performance, I will tell you that when it comes to hiring, I never ask questions about what would you do if, because I'm going to tell us, most of you have no idea what you're going to do in a situation until you're in the situation. But asking a potential team member, when you were in high school and trying to get a project done, and you were working with a team and they were not pulling their own weight, what did you do? When you were working on a project and it didn't end the way you wanted it to do, what was your thought process on it? When you were any number of questions, they're called behavior-based questions. Patrick Lencioni, again, I've trained a great deal of time under him, wrote a phenomenal book called The Ideal Team Player. Patrick Lencioni, and I will tell you, I recommend that book to all of my clients that they read it so that they can actually improve tremendously their interview process. And I will tell you, my clients that have drunk the Kool-Aid, they spend a minimum of an hour doing their interview process, and most of it is not related to their technical skills. And I will tell you that with those clients that use that process, they hire team members that stay. And I will tell you, there's nothing more expensive in a vet practice than a revolving door with your team members. So if you can get the right people on the bus going in the right direction, you've won. And I realize that dates back to Good to Great with Jim Collins, but it still is appropriate today. Finding the people that are a good fit for your culture and then growing and supporting them is the way for you not to be the only person that's doing everything in the clinic. And you'll find that when it comes to delegation, when it comes to decision making, you've got a much better support group behind you. So you not having to make every decision and not be able to go on vacation, it works much better when you've got a support team that truly is a good team.
Amazing. Now, for our practice owners listening in who haven't done that due diligence, but they still have a team, who might not be optimal in character, personality, or thought process, but now they have them. What can you tell them about assisting the current team to take up a little bit more ownership? Is it possible? How is it possible?
If you have basically good people, it is possible. Now, part of what I'm going to tell you, if you want to improve your team that you have, one of the first places you need to start is by consistently pushing what the purpose is of your clinic. Why did you start or buy this clinic? And I will tell you, it wasn't to make more money, and it wasn't not to have headaches, because owning a business, especially in today's economy and situation, there's a lot of work to owning a business. So if this is generally some way, somehow, there was some reason why you wanted to improve the medical care of the patient base in your area. It can be particular things that you want to improve dentistry, or that you want to get rid of some endemic problem that you have. I have several rural clinics that are in parvo endemic areas. And if you've ever watched a puppy go through parvo, you never want to see that happen again. Or in equine practices, watching foals die of encephalitis because they didn't get a vaccine. So continuing to talk to your team and share with them what the purpose is of this clinic. And then to help them learn what their contribution was to achieving that purpose of the clinic. And it is interesting. A number of years ago, I was in a practice and we started doing this of talking about the purpose of the clinic. And after the doctor talked about it, and we had spent several days talking about the purpose of the clinic, in our evening huddle, we asked the team, what did you do this week in order to achieve the purpose? And I will tell you, the owner and I looked at each other because the team had nothing to say, could not contribute anything that they had done in order to achieve the purpose. Although that week, on Monday, a dog came in very close to death. And on Friday, that dog left the clinic with its tail wagging and walking out of the clinic. It wasn't the doctor doing the treatment all week long on that dog. It is just hard I was going to say the part of the issue was on us that we weren't connecting with the team. But to some extent, we may have team members that are in it for the paycheck and not to be a contributing member of the purpose of that clinic. And that's hard to say. But not everybody delves into the purpose that we would like them to have.
Okay, just so that I can get that clarified there, Elise. So that the team members did not see what they have done for that dog as a contributor.
You're right. They thought that the only people that saved lives in that clinic was the doctors in the surgery suite. For some reason, we were not able to connect with them, that them monitoring and feeding the dog and taking it out and just stroking its head when it was not feeling well was contributing to the overall purpose of that clinic. If the staff members were not administering or monitoring the fluids or that kind of thing, monitoring fluids to make sure that they were dripping at the rate they were supposed to be dripping contributed to that dog getting healthy almost as much as the doctor cutting it up and putting it back together again correctly. And we just don't always realize that it's not just the big things. It's the little things that we're doing that make a difference. If the cages aren't cleaned right, then the next dog that gets put in a cage comes down with whatever the previous animal had. But you don't think about how important cleaning cages is.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. The difference between purpose-driven and what can
Paycheck-driven.
I suppose so. Yeah, the complete mental mode, the perspective of looking at the same action really, it seems that in long-term scenarios makes a huge difference on the sustainability of the business, the sustainability of the mental piece of people working at that business itself. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Elise, for that great eye-opener. Now, before we get back to the episode, I want to take a moment to speak to practice owners who feel they should be getting more from their marketing. A lot of veterinary clinics are doing things that seem right. They're posting on social media, running ads, updating their website, asking for reviews, but the results still feel inconsistent. New clients are not coming in steadily, phone's not ringing enough, and no one is fully sure what is actually driving growth. That kind of uncertainty is expensive. When your marketing lacks a clear strategy, you do not just lose visibility, you lose appointments, you lose momentum, and you end up spending time and money on efforts that are not really helping the business grow. This is why we are offering a complimentary marketing strategy meeting through Veterinary Business Institute. In this session, you will sit down with a veterinary marketing strategist who has worked with hundreds of clinics, and together you will look at your current marketing through the lens of business growth. By the end of the session, you will have a clearer view of what is driving results right now, where the hidden gaps may be costing you appointments, how your online presence is shaping the client journey, and what steps you can take over the next 6 months to grow more predictably. So this is not just a conversation, it is a working session built to give you practical direction. Now, if you have been feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or unsure where to focus next, this is a great place to start. Book your complimentary strategy meeting at www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. That's www.veterinarybusinessinstitute, that's one word, .com/MSM. Availability is limited each month, so if this sounds helpful, I recommend claiming your spot while openings are still available. Now, let's get back to the episode.
Good job
Elise?
there. It's interesting when you find things that aren't working, if you get help from an outside consultant and find out what you could do better. Good advice on any side of a veterinary practice.
So, Elise, with your financial background, how do you help owners look at their numbers in a way that feels useful instead of overwhelming?
I always find it interesting when veterinarians tell me that they don't like numbers. Because in all reality, my signature speech is financial statements, the lab report for your practice. And when I listen to them all day long, interacting, especially with their staff, it's all 5 mgs per gigs kind of thing, and weight divided by, and cc's deposited by, and all of this kinds of stuff. So they're dealing with numbers all day long. It's just something that they're familiar with when they're talking their veterinary numbers. When we're talking financial numbers, I will tell you that most of them have not had accounting classes as part of their prerequisite for getting into vet school, nor did they, when they were in vet school, have classes in how to read a financial statement. And in all reality, part of what I try to do with financial statements is not to use tax, is first of all, to help them understand that the financial statements are there to help them learn better how to make their patient better. And their patient in this case is their practice itself. And I talk about red blood cell financial statements and white blood cell financial statements. And the difference is most of them have financial statements prepared by their accountants. And remember, as an accountant, I like talking about numbers. They like talking about animals. Nobody likes talking about with people. So part of what we want to do is start communicating with each other about what it is we want them to learn. Tax financial statements tell the government you're a poor, starving veterinarian who shouldn't be paying any taxes. But that doesn't give you any information as to whether or not your practice is actually providing a good living for you and your team. And that's when I call them red blood cell financial statements, or management level. And what I sit down with the veterinarian is, first of all, show them the groupings on the financial statements. And I explain to them things like we have revenue, and I don't just put professional services, but I actually show them that they're doing surgery and vaccines and food and imaging and things of this sort, so they can relate what's going on in their financial statements, kind of gathering the information from their practice management software to see whether or not they're doing the appropriate level of diagnostics, or the early detention screening is the new word that I learned this week instead of calling it blood work. But whether or not they're doing enough surgery or they're doing enough dentistry, they can actually see data and learn to understand what is telling them. Then I go into separating out the cost of goods sold. And most of them can figure out, especially today, thanks to Chewy, that Chewy and some of these other distributors are able to sell products to the public at cheaper costs than they themselves can buy the products from the distributors. So learning how to look at those numbers grouped together in an area so that they can see whether or not their cost of goods sold is running 30%, that's not sustainable. We need to figure out what else we can do in our clinics in order to change the numbers so that the patient becomes healthier. When I talk to them about what the numbers are saying in relation to the patient becoming healthier, it's much different than talking about current ratios and assets and liabilities and revenue and expenses and some of this other jargon that we accountants like to use, because then we can confuse you and then you have to hire us. But I really, really, really want my veterinarians to understand what those financial statements are saying, to understand the story so that together we can look to see what we need to do in order to change the ending to the story that's being written. And that's my job, and as the consultant, to help them and their team develop those strategies to change the story. And that's fun, because when you're looking at data, when you can actually see that the recommendations that you're making, the cost of goods sold ratio is coming back down into the lower 20% instead of 26 or 7%. I mean, that's real money falling to the bottom line. And we're not in it for the money, but it sure helps cover the payroll at the end of the month when you've got some money coming in.
Absolutely. Elise, you mentioned over here with regards to the appropriate level of diagnostics. Now, I'm curious as to what do you mean by the appropriate levels? Are you talking about benchmarks?
Well, it was interesting. One of the things that I look at production numbers and all kinds of data in a practice. And one of the things that I find interesting is if I'm looking at the lab work is getting lower. For example, it's declining. And then I go look at the production numbers of the doctors. And in one of the clinics I was in, they do a lot of wellness visits in their clinic. But they discovered that they were only ordering 1 to 1.5 diagnostic blood works a week in their practice. That's not in it. I am not a veterinarian, so I can't tell you what the appropriate number is, but I can tell you that it's more than 1 out of 20 or 25, 25 patients that you're seeing. It's also interesting that for some reason, when you look at the production of the doctors, it's like they forgot how to say, we're going to order up some blood work or early detection screening for this. I know it's a healthy 3-year-old dog, but patients are really good at hiding from you, various illnesses that are starting, especially cats. Cats do not share well at all. So having these diagnostic screening tests early on gives you some information, and it is always cheaper to treat something in the early stages than waiting until later on. So looking at the numbers and just seeing, there's also interesting, there are certain ratios of lab costs to lab revenue and, just certain other things. It was interesting also that one of the distributors, I was in the practice a couple of weeks ago, and one of the distributors had put a new program in for their clients, and it was a difficult program to implement, and the doctor clients were just having it backwards. So they were undoing exactly what the distributor was trying to have happen. And it was just looking at the numbers and saying, something isn't right. And so, and I don't expect necessarily the doctor to be poring over these financial statements as much as I do. But I do say that you've got to find an accountant who somewhere in there likes people and is willing to talk to you and not just send you the financial statements once a month or once a quarter or at tax time. Communication is everything.
Absolutely. And an accountant who likes people is a gem.
And there are not a lot of us.
Indeed. Now, Elise, when a practice wants to grow in a healthier, more sustainable way, what are the first changes you usually recommend?
Look at your staff. And I'm serious about that. I really do want to make sure that the staff buys into the reason why they're there. Assuming that you believe that or you do have a good staff, you're just not communicating with them well enough. One of the things that I do start having, and I know this sounds strange, but regularly scheduled meetings. And they're not death by meetings. They're meetings where we're sharing and asking them for input on decisions that are being made. I also, for better, for worse, or in between, also have done away with annual performance reviews. And what I institute instead is, in my perfect world that I like to live in, monthly check-ins with the staff, where once a month for 15 or 20 minutes, behind closed doors with your telephone turned off, asking them, how are you doing? What have you learned? What challenges are you facing? How can I help you? Kind of thing, just to get more of an understanding of what's happening in the practice. The doctors are very often, frequently busy in the exam rooms, and they really don't get tuned in to what's going on culture-wise in their practice. And the best way to find out is to talk to your staff. And obviously having a psychologically safe environment so your staff really does feel that if they tell you something, they're not going to get their heads cut off. And that's important. And that to some extent also making the doctors understand, the owners understand, that they are always, always, always on stage. So they need to be walking the talk on what it is that they want to have happening. When staff members are coming in late and the doctors are coming in later, they're not exactly walking the talk. And so I hear it from practice leaders, team leaders all the time. How do I beat up my staff to get them to come in on time when the doctors are 20 minutes late coming for their first appointment? So to some extent, it's modeling the walk of what you're wanting, checking in with your team frequently, and talking with consultants or there are lots of experts out there. You're good in marketing. At Vet Partners, for example, there are experts and consultants that can help you with any number of areas in your practices that need help. So asking for help also is kind of one of the things I would recommend. Obviously, when you talk with us, we help you find out where you need help and then recommend or help you with the changes that need to be made. And when they're not carbon copy practices, some practices need help in some areas, others need help in other areas. But generally, it's a people and a communication starting point.
Right. That's great. Now, I was curious, if we are doing away with the annual performance review, how are we implementing raises and that sort of thing?
Well, we're not in it for the money, remember that. But in all reality, if I've got good people, I obviously want to get them paid. I also look at the performance of the practice of the clinic in terms of the financial practice. And much of what I look at with our clinics is what we have is bonuses that are paid. We set goals. And if we want, for example, that revenue needs to be 60,000 a month kind of thing, or whatever it is in a clinic. If we set a goal that says, if we get it to 65,000, and I'm making up the numbers, if we make it to 65,000, then we're going to take 10, 15, 20, whatever it is, percent of that increase that we've achieved and share it with the team. And I use team bonuses. I don't give individual bonuses because I really want this to be a team functioning there. I don't want the CSRs fighting against the technicians or the technicians fighting amongst each other. I want it to be a team, and it takes a whole team. And I don't want to be noted as the practice that pays the least. In most of our clinics, the well-functioning clinics, the teams are very well paid for what they're doing, and the doctors are able to provide medical insurance and retirement plans and all those kinds of things that are benchmarks of a good business. And it's because they have a good business with a team that is supporting them. But to me, annual performance approvals make no sense at all. Why you would wait a year to tell a receptionist that she's answering the phone wrong just makes no sense to me.
Check.
We have to learn how to have conversations in real time, providing feedback for our staff. Not only bad feedback, but also good feedback.
Right. So, Elise, we have arrived at the end of our podcast here. Before we close out this session, I would love for you to give our listeners the golden key takeaway from our conversation. What would it be?
21st century business philosophy, which is very different from the industrial age. It's team of teams, it's collaboration, it's people versus profit. And I'm not saying don't have profit, but one of the groups that I'm involved in is the Enlightened Rebels, that basically we teach this stuff on a regular basis, but we talk directive leadership and send away from centralized authority to sharing collective leadership, from real networks of teams, transparency, the kind of things that we've been talking about for the last hour, away from the way Ford did the assembly lines at the turn of the century, and way into the kind of businesses today, Patagonia for one, for example, REI for another, the kind of businesses that are very profitable and have teams that stay with them. They're not revolving doors kind of thing. Southwest Airlines under the old leadership was very much a business that followed some of what we've talking about. Things have changed, and I don't want to delve into that, but businesses that practice the 21st century leadership models are thriving in today's environment.
So one of the clearest takeaways from our conversation is success in a veterinary practice is no longer about one person carrying everything. It's about building systems, teams, and the visibility needed for the business to run at a higher level. For our owners, that challenge is not just growth, it's building a practice that does not depend on them for every single thing. That is why leadership, financial clarity, and team ownership are so important. If you want to build a practice that is stronger, more scalable, and more profitable, it starts with making intentional changes in how you lead and how the business operates. So if you're ready for that next step, book a complimentary strategy session at veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. That's veterinarybusinessinstitute.com/MSM. I'm Don Adeesha, and this has been the Veterinary Business Institute's podcast. Until next time, take care.